In less than a month, we'll celebrate the 55th anniversary of a significant event in Greensboro's history, the beginning of the sit-in movement. It happened at what was the Woolworth's Five and Dime store on Elm Street downtown. Inside this store was a whites-only lunch counter. On February 1st, 1960, 4 North Carolina A&T State University students sat down at that lunch counter waiting to be served. They were not, and they ended up staying there. Many believe this helped jumpstart the civil rights movement. Then in 2010, in that old Woolworth store, the International Civil Rights Center and Museum opened. It commemorates, among other things, what happened there in 1960s. But the museum has struggled financially ever since it opened, and Lacy Ward was hired as its executive director in May of last year to turn things around. But not even 6 months later, he was fired. Tonight in Newsmakers, he's talking on camera for the first time since he lost his job.
I think we proved in the 1950s and 60s that diplomacy by nonviolent means, right? Diplomacy through peace could actually work in America, and the Constitution could hold the nation together. That's the way I want to teach the civil rights era.
And Lacy Ward thought taking the executive director's job here could help him teach that message. How would you describe the museum's financial shape when you began this job in May of last year?
I've used the same word over and over, dire.
At this point in time, is the International Civil Rights Center and Museum essentially broke?
I think so. I think the museum has $800,000 or so in debt that needs to pay off in 2015, for which funds have not yet been raised, nor have other arrangements been made for payment.
Your termination last November, how big of a surprise was it?
Oh, not a surprise. Everything's been very divided on the board, and it really does split almost down the middle.
Ward says the side led by museum co-founders Earl Jones and Skip Alston was especially resistive when he tried really hard, as 2014 wound down, to implement 3 recommendations a fundraising consultant had made back in 2012. Ward felt the suggestions were essential in establishing relations with a broader range of new donors: term limits for board members, term limits for officers, and financial contributions from 100% of board members.
And this happens on every nonprofit board. The board gives first.
But Ward kept on fighting, and the board faction kept complaining about how he was doing his job. Did you speak too frankly and publicly about the museum's finances?
Yes. And the reason you speak frankly and publicly is because you want the public to understand the challenge before you, and you want them to agree to partner with you to meet that challenge.
Were you trying to change the museum's message to attract a larger, whiter audience?
I was trying to attract a larger American audience.
What is your response to the accusations of inappropriate behavior with a female employee and sexual harassment that were reportedly discussed by the board prior to your termination?
I actually think she said it best when she said she received more pressure from the board to find a way to condemn me than she felt pressure from me in inappropriate behavior.
Our city and our country is better for the actions of the Greensboro Four.
Even so, the board voted to fire Ward, and Mayor Nancy Vaughn proposed the city take over operations of the museum, a proposal the museum's founders and others flatly rejected. Should the museum board take the mayor's offer to run the place?
Yes.
Why?
The city is the donor of last resort, and the need is great. And I really don't know who in the network of possible donors is willing to take that on.
If the city were to take over the museum and offered to reinstate you in that position, would you take the job?
I think it's very dangerous to be a bargaining chip in this whole discussion. The key issue here is governance of the museum. And you don't build a board around a director, you build a board around a vision. So Blair, McCain, McNeill, Richmond, they never tried to own the movement. They tried to start the movement and did a very good job. Right? They never said it was my movement. They were a board. They birthed an idea. They sold it to a broader public. They defined ways in which a broader public could participate and make it grow. And they appreciated what a broader public did for them.
And that, he says, is a lesson from which the current museum board can learn. He went on to tell me the city should not take over the museum without demanding a strong balance sheet and the adoption of the best practices of the nonprofit sector, and that includes term limits for board members.
And it's obviously been several weeks since he was fired. So
early November.
What has he been up to?
Well, he's been taking a lot of phone calls. He said he was fired on a Monday, and on Tuesday he was getting calls from recruiters.
Wow.
He says he will eventually take a new job. Those jobs are out there, but he still feels there are some issues here in Greensboro he can possibly help with, so he plans to stay in touch, and so will we.